You're listening to a 58 Ember production.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Girls Camp podcast. I'm your host, Haley Rawl, and I am joined today by the one and only, well, the two and only Zelph on the shelf. Sam is back for her second time on Girls Camp podcast, but Tanner, this is your first time. Welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome, Tanner.
Thank you.
You're nice and cozy.
It's fun to be a girl. Just camped and campy.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Welcome to Girls Camp, honestly. Today we are
I know all the songs. Sorry.
You do?
Yeah.
How? You just
I
took an
listen.
interest?
I listen. Got like the rig-a-bamboo. Now what is that?
I love
it's something
that one.
made.
My Princess Pat.
Yep.
Yep. I thrived there. Yeah, Girls Camp. Did you have a lot of Girls Camp experiences? I didn't ask you that last time.
Only one, and it was in England.
Okay.
Because I was a convert at like 16. So I did go to one girls' camp. I don't know any songs.
Was it quite different?
It
Probably.
was just kind of outdoorsy, and we definitely didn't do like the burying. That's Trek, where you bury the flower baby.
Oh, yeah, the flower
It was
baby.
a pretty normal England camp experience.
Yeah.
Non-Mormons are like, pause. Excuse me.
Put a pin in flower baby.
Burying.
Yes, I did a Trek episode if you need some commentating that piece of it. Fantastic. Today we are talking about shelf breakers, which I was just texting you and I realized it's quite fitting with the name Zelph on the shelf. Do you know the origin of the term shelf breakers? I had no idea until late last night when I Googled it. Okay. To be fair, this was a very brief bit of research, and I found someone on Reddit 10 years ago who compiled some information. So take
Impressive that you even did that amount of research.
Yeah,
Amazing
honestly,
sleuthing.
you know when you're on Reddit, you can kind of get a vibe. I'm like, this person seems like they know their stuff.
Absolutely.
I'm an intuitive Redditor for sure.
Yes, exactly.
Reddit
I'm like, this feels credible just based on vibes and pure vibes alone.
And you can trust yourself with that.
Thank you.
I just know
Yes.
from knowing you.
The intuition did guide in that moment. This person deleted their username, so I cannot credit them. However, this is what they said about the origin of the term shelf breaker. The earliest recorded use of the shelf analogy in a Mormon context that I can find is by Sister Camila Kimball, the wife of the LDS Church president, Spencer W. Kimball. I doubt she was the origin of the expression or even that it originated within Mormon culture, but it appears to have been in currency for some time. It's only since the internet era that its secondary connotation as a gradual, think of the straw that breaks the camel's back, or sudden epiphany of the church's implausibility has overtaken its original faith-promoting origins. The original faith-promoting usage is still in currency, and the principle involved is universal throughout the church. In fact, it is frequently employed to discourage members from informing themselves about things that actually do have concrete answers. This person sounds pretty legit.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm
That was
like,
good.
okay, I'll take
Really
your word
good
for
job.
it, Redditor. Okay, this is the quote that Sister Kimball, the first time the shelf thing was mentioned in Mormon context. And I think there's a bit to unpack here.
Let's go, Kim.
Yes, Sister Kimball says, I've always had an inquiring mind. I'm not satisfied just to accept things. I like to follow through and study things out. I learned early to put aside those gospel questions that I couldn't answer. I had a shelf of things I didn't understand, but as I've grown older and studied and prayed and thought about each problem, one by one, I've been able to better understand them.
Kind of a chilling quote. Is anyone else feeling that?
Quite chilling.
Thinking about her being the wife of the prophet, and she's like, I have had a lot of questions. I've had to do a lot of studying, and I've had to put them on the shelf.
Absolutely.
Like, I'd rather just believe that she was kind of blind to it, and
I know.
because it's harder to imagine that.
Right? It almost makes it worse in a way.
Because what could you do if you're the prophet's wife and you would have no power?
I mean, even the
You're
prophet
stuck.
had in Spencer W. Kimball's biography by his son, it talks about some of his shelf items. Like race was always a thing. He was the one who, made the change eventually.
Yeah.
But that was always a big thing for him, as well as he once got a very strong prompting as he was blessing a fellow apostle that he was going to be the next prophet. And he just knew it as well as he had known anything in his life. And then that guy died. And he was like, what was that then?
What was that then? Interesting. And his son had written about those things?
Yeah. It's from his journal. It was written in his journal. He was a very diligent journal keeper, as many Mormons are.
As many Mormons are. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what struck me about that was two things. Was the thing that there even needs to be a shelf in the first place is just automatically, why must there be a shelf on which to put questions that don't have answers? Already, I think we're in pretty murky water with that concept, especially to your point, from not only the wife of a prophet, but someone publicly talking about like, this is a great thing to just put things on a shelf. And then the other thing I think is interesting is she says, as I've grown older and studied and prayed and thought about each problem one by one, I've been able to better understand them. Does that not encapsulate so well this Mormon understanding, right? It's not like, oh, I discovered the information that then answered my very reasonable concerns and problems. It's basically, as it rings to me, I kind of just got used to the fact and became okay with the fact that there's some major issues.
Yeah, and you got to take them one by one, because if you try and piece them together, then you're screwed.
I was actually anticipating the end of her phrase there to be something totally different, and what she actually said betrayed much more than what I thought. I thought she was going to say, I eventually understood them better, but what did she say?
She said, she did say better understand them, but she said, as I've grown older and studied and prayed and thought about each problem, one by one, I've been able to better understand them.
I just feel like, so in my head, I see like each item as a jar with something in it. And she's saying, okay, I've put this jar of information, this concept here, and I've put other ones here. And as time goes on, I've created this narrative and had this narrative reinforced that it doesn't matter that they're there. Where what I thought she was going to say, I've been able to take them down and examine them and realize like it was all good. But she's not. She's just like, I'm aware that I understand that they just have to be there. And that's what we have to do to get by in this world.
Exactly.
But
That's
it's
what
like
it feels
what
like.
really has to happen is taking down the jars, opening them up, examining them, and then making a call. Like that's how you understand things. Nobody's like, oh, algebra is just going to be too hard. Just put that on the shelf and then never look at it. In fact, trying to study any higher mathematics is actually kind of a sin, and just don't talk about it really, and we'll learn about that in the next life. It's just ridiculous to have this forbidden information is so
Yes.
telling.
It feels like she's saying, I became comfortable enough with the fact that they existed there.
Yeah.
And that was enough. It's also really interesting because I was thinking about how this just reinforces a narrative of continually put things on your shelf. And as you are putting things on the shelf, you are getting further entrenched in all things Mormonism. And then the further entrenched you are, the more likely you are to just continue to stay because you're entrenched, because you've given time and energy continually. And just thinking about how this concept probably works to just keep people in the church longer, and then long enough that it's just kind of like, well, I may as well just stay in the church because I've done it this long. And even the using time as a weapon of like, just keep waiting, which the church also does in many other ways as well. Okay, so that's the shelf breaker thing. I wanted to ask both of you if you have a specific shelf breaker yourself, if there's something that you can point to that was kind of like the moment.
The final.
Yeah.
Like none of this is true.
Yes.
There's definitely like a series of those things. My like breaking point with the church specifically, I had been reading D. Michael Quinn, who is a BYU history professor who was fired from BYU due to publishing just historical documents that the church didn't want published.
As one often
and
is.
then excommunicated for being gay, but a really incredible historian and very thorough footnotes. I was reading that at the time and, going through the journals and the minute meetings of the Quorums of the 12 following the schism after the death of Joseph Smith. And sorry if this is too long of a moment.
No, please. I'm here for it.
You're slaying.
It was just becoming more and more clear to me that like, I don't see God intervening anywhere at this point. I see humans with various motives and desires that are connecting over this thing, and at all times inserting their will and their knowledge and their understanding under the pretense of working with God. But I just couldn't see it anywhere. I couldn't see like any point where God was like, ding. It was just becoming so much clear that this is all just guys being guides, dudes doing dude stuff. And
Ain't that the truth?
and so that's all kind of building. And then Samantha sent me the documentary Going Clear, the key
seen Going Clear?
Scientology and the Prison of Belief.
I've been thinking a lot about Scientology lately because I think Tom Cruise's daughter, Suri, just changed her last name. She doesn't want to be Suri Cruise anymore or something because of, Tom Cruise took his kids with Nicole Kidman and then has completely abandoned Suri because they're all in Scientology. Anyway, I've been thinking about Scientology and how wild it is. So that's
Very
interesting.
brave
that
of
was
you
a
to
piece
talk
of it.
about Scientology on the podcast.
Yeah.
Really?
We
Well,
support
they're just-
Scientology.
Oh, because of like powers that
Because
be.
they're
we avoid
genuinely
talking
like a
about
brutal
them.
cult. Like, the Mormon Church will create shell organizations to do their bidding, whether financially or public relations. They'll fund some channel that will just do all its dirty shit talking and character assassinations of people who just want to talk about things,
Yeah.
as we're all familiar with.
Yep.
The Church of Scientology will like actually go after people and like kill their dogs and shit. Like it's bad
Yikes.
news.
But not us, because we support
Not-
Scientologists.
This is endorsed.
We don't support, but
by-
we love everyone and think. Anyway, I watched that documentary, and as I'm watching, you see these people who have these like really big conversion experiences, very comparable to the ones that I had in the church, where it's this, feels like new revelation, your mind opening up, your heart opening up, and you're like, wow, this is real, and just devoting yourself 100% to it. Like, this is true, this is real. We're gonna change the world. We're doing it. Like, this is the thing, and getting further and further in. And gradually having those looks behind the curtain. And I can just see like in real time parallel to my same journey, those curtains beginning to fall and those little cracks in the facade that, reveal what's going on behind the scenes, behind the stage. And then by the end where, the people realize like, oh, I'm in a cult.
Yeah.
Like it just was like settled on me. And I was like, I kind of asked myself the question, like, if I was in a cult, how would I know it? Would I want to know it? And by the end of that, I was like, this is exactly what I've been. This is it. Like it's all too close. It's the same stuff, and it is the same kind of thing. In every cult documentary that you watch, you can see all the parallels, the degrees of control, the manipulation, so on and so forth. But yep, after that, I immediately emailed my bishop. I was a ward clerk at the time, and I was like, I need to be released.
You're
I'm
like,
not
sorry,
going to do this anymore.
I'm out. Wow, that's interesting to think about the potential value of enough distance where you're not watching an ex-Mormon documentary. You have enough distance to be like, okay, they're not trying to call me out specifically, but
Yeah.
it is.
Well, it's like you watch documentaries and they're like, if you're just talking to apologists, you're like, oh yeah, child brides. Oh yeah, bank fraud. Oh yeah, immigration fraud. Oh yeah, like whatever, blood atonement, blood rituals, whatever, haha, vengeance oaths, penalty. Yeah, no, that's just how God works. But then you watch that in like a different organization, you're like, ooh, child brides. Ooh, blood rituals.
It's true.
Ooh, and then it's like, oh, my cult bingo card. If I'm judging myself by what I'm judging and seeing in other people without the just lens I've been conditioned to accept since childhood,
Yep.
it becomes really clear what's happening. And I feel like that's a lot of people's journey is seeing those parallels. Not everybody, obviously, but
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. What about you, Sam?
So it took me about 3 more weeks to have the complete shelf break moment after Tanner had his, but we both watched Going Clear at the same time, and that was definitely a piece of it. Like, I think understanding like the psychology of religious belief can almost be like more helpful than learning about the history, because you're just so primed to shut down all the historical stuff, and you've heard the apologetics. But ultimately my shelf breaking thing was polygamy, and specifically the child brides, just because I had read all the apologetics I could get my hands on. Like, I read Fair Mormon and like this guy called Denver Snuffer, who is one of those people that believes Joseph didn't actually do polygamy. It was Brigham Young, and then blah, blah, blah. I just like read all the excuses I could find, and none of them were ever satisfying. There was a day where I like allowed myself to finally read on this page called Mormon Think. It was basically like a list of quotes about polygamy from church leaders and from the women and children involved in it. And once I actually read like what the women and children said about it, I was like, no, it was just like a complete unraveling in that moment.
Yeah, like it just can't be.
It takes a while.
Yeah.
Like, it's like I had to kind of run up to polygamy, run back, run towards it. Oh shit, have to, you know, figure out how I'm gonna. It's like an ongoing process, and then eventually you're just like, no.
Isn't it crazy to think about? As I was reading through all these submissions of people's shelf breakers, it almost struck me more how much we put up with, or that we allowed, or that we like even tried to make sense of before the thing was finally like, okay, no. And I think I don't know, I'm just fascinated by the psychology behind it of you can convince yourself and convince yourself and convince yourself. And then finally there's something that it's just like, can't do the child bride thing. Like can't do the cult mind control thing. Like it's just interesting to see where that does break down for people. And I do think it's definitely a process, but I also find it interesting where we can all point to like those significant shifts. Mine, I think I have also, you know, there's like kind of multiple points in the journey, but I think one of the biggest things that didn't necessarily break my shelf, but I think changed my paradigm enough for my shelf to break soon thereafter, was I was listening to a podcast and someone actually wrote in about this, and whoever wrote in about this, we are shelf break sisters. I was like, oh, it's like Eskimo sisters where we kiss the same guy, but I'm like, oh, it's like we had almost the exact moment. She said, however, that hers was listening to Year of Polygamy podcast.
Lindsay Hansen Park.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bless her, hallowed be her name.
Forever and ever.
Forever and ever. I thought that I was listening to also kind of odd, a Norman Memes podcast. I don't know if maybe I made this up in my head. Do you know of Norman Memes? They're like Mormon. I don't know where they are. I need to track them down.
That sounds familiar from like a while ago.
Yes, they were like a progressive Mormon just meme page.
Like from Facebook.
Yes. Yeah. And they like made memes like making fun of Mormon culture. I think they were progressive Mormon. And they had a podcast. Maybe it was briefly. I don't remember. But they were talking about the word of wisdom. And they were saying that at the time the word of wisdom was revealed to Joseph Smith, there was like a health movement against hot drinks, just generally speaking. People were like, oh, hot drinks are bad for your throat. They like are bad for your health. And that fact alone was like whoosh, like my whole world, because I realized none of it is unique.
Yeah.
It's all just a product of all the things that inform it.
Yes.
And I think growing up as a very Provo Mormon girl, I didn't even understand that people around the same time as Joseph Smith were also saying they saw God and were also trying to search. I didn't know that. And so to have that paradigm shift, then the dominoes start to fall of just like, oh, there's nothing special about Joseph Smith. There's nothing unique about the things he's teaching. To me, I had it instilled in me, oh, the word of wisdom is so unique because nobody else isn't drinking coffee. But I'm like, oh no, it's just incredibly outdated based on science from like the 1800s.
Yeah.
And then that realization began to apply down the line. It's kind of funny that the word of wisdom thing was that paradigm shifter for me.
Was that the moment that it like you kind of did that walk through that series of
Yes.
ideas in that moment, like within a
Not
short time period?
necessarily, but I think it was the moment where I was like, oh, okay, Joseph Smith was just doing what people at the time were doing. In some ways, you know, obviously he had his own flair, but I was like, oh, God didn't tell him. I think maybe it was more that too. I was like, God didn't tell him coffee was bad. He read it in a magazine.
Yeah.
And then was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, let's make this the word of wisdom. You
Totally.
know? But funnily enough, I feel like Mormons love the story of the men were all spitting tobacco on the floor and Emma Smith had to clean it up, Joseph's wife.
Because she's the woman.
Yeah,
so
of course. So she's scrubbing their tobacco spit. And then how like that informed the word of wisdom. There's a little bit of an acknowledgement in some ways. Some of this just almost seems like practical. Like Joseph Smith was like, well, Emma's sick of like scrubbing our spit off the floor, so maybe let's like ban that thing. You know, like there's a little bit of acknowledgement of that and just how blurry those lines can get.
It's like Emma's like saying to Joseph, you got to get all of your bros to stop spitting on the floor. It's so disgusting. And he's like, I can't. How am I supposed to tell them to?
It's like, that's
And then he's
embarrassing.
like, I'm going to figure this out.
He can't just be like, yo, like my wife like wants you guys
Yeah.
like not
like
to do
everyone
Like,
chill with the
offend the
tobacco
bros.
spit.
Yeah.
that. He's
He's
like,
like,
God revealed
Big brain
something to
thinking.
me.
you like that's so Raven.
honestly, when you really get into the history of Joseph Smith, it really is that.
No,
it's like,
yeah.
oh, a problem arose, and he just like, conveniently, God had something to say about it, and conveniently, it was what Joseph Smith would probably want to say about that same thing.
That would get so annoying when you're in arguments with Joseph Smith. He's like, I'm going to be right back.
People need to be putting that into their art. Put that into like freestyle raps,
Yeah.
Joseph Smith. Like
Seriously.
instead of manipulating people by like playing God, just
Channel
put
it
it into your
differently.
art.
Channel it differently.
Like your book, great. Why do you got to sell it as a real thing? Like
Yeah, not all art has to be performance
Yep.
art either. It's okay to just have it be a play.
Yep. Just write it down.
That you wrote.
Tell a story. Tell a story. It doesn't have to be the Book of Mormon revealed by God. Okay, let's jump into these stories because we have much to continue breaking down. Oh, here's a Joseph one. So someone wrote in and said that their shelf breaker was that the first account of the first vision in 1832 in Joseph's own handwriting only mentions the Lord singular and no mention of starting a church. I found out about the various accounts of the first vision not until my mission.
same.
Really?
Yeah.
Did someone tell? My mission president told us. Did you hear from like someone on the streets or something?
My mission companion is from California and is just like a super cool guy. And one of those, the more I grow up, California Mormons were always so like, oh, they're not like the real ones. They're just fake and blah, blah, blah. And now every Mormon I know in California is like the coolest
Yeah.
person because they're just like not judgmental and they're just
Yeah.
like, I just believe this and it makes me a better person. I'm like, hell yeah. Anyway, he was like that. And he told me that at like BYU, they had learned that, and I was just kind of like, oh, and he's like, yeah, and I had to like wrestle with that, but
But it is
Did
what
you
it
have to
is.
wrestle with that?
well, I didn't read it at the time, thank goodness, or that would have added
Yeah.
way more stress to the stress I was already enduring there. You were in the MTC. What mission did you go to?
No, I was on my mission. I went to Berlin, and my
Oh,
mission president was German. And for like one like thing, I don't know, one of the things where all the missionaries sat down and he was teaching us something, he was like, yeah, like here are all the accounts of Joseph Smith's vision, and here's what people say about that, but here's why it's not a problem. And it's such an odd phenomenon to be presented that type of information with such an immediate, it's okay though. I remember feeling embarrassed, like it was my fault that I didn't know that was a thing, because it was kind of being presented to me like, oh, you know, like of course, like there's multiple accounts of the first vision. I'm like, oh, like looking around like, oh, I guess we're supposed to know that. And then just being like, yeah, there's some inconsistencies, but like ultimately, you know, no one tells the same story the exact same way every time. And I was just kind of like, all right. And I just like never really thought about it, to be honest, which is also a little bit alarming in retrospect.
You got a lot on your plate.
Yeah,
as
I
a
did have a
Mormon
lot on my
missionary
plate.
and-
I did have a lot on my plate. Yes, absolutely. But I actually read the first account of the first vision in full last night for the first time. And yeah, it's interesting. It's a never ending well, the Mormon history
Totally different
thing.
vibe.
Really, truly.
Yeah, it really is. I was like, oh, okay, it's different. So there's that one. And if anyone's intrigued, go check out the multiple accounts of the first vision. This next one is really fascinating. Someone says, Bednar's, so Elder Bednar, who is an apostle.
Just the worst.
A sentient robot, the first of his kind.
Truly. I was a Bednar stan, though. I loved Bednar.
get it.
Yeah,
I get it.
I feel like people either loved Bednar, Holland, or Christofferson. There's like three kind of, this is just...
I love them both, all
yeah,
three.
I would
You loved
never
all
not
three?
love all of them.
I feel like I actually, now that I'm saying that, I was more of a Christofferson girly than a Bednar girly.
The legalistic, like
Yeah.
straightforward.
Christopherson never stood out to me.
He seemed so smart to me. Like he felt like he had a more intellectual bend
Yeah, he
that I liked.
tries.
Yeah, he tried.
I would imagine you being a Holland girly because of the English
Really?
literature. of it
Yeah.
all.
I was a Holland girly
was a
through and
Holland
through. I was
girly.
one of the, it's like,
But I was also an Uchtdorf girl.
oh, of course.
Okay, I wasn't
That too.
soulless.
Yeah, no.
That too. Funny enough, this is very random, but when I was reading those Word Radio comments, so we were just talking before this episode about
You should bleep out
hit
Ward Radio.
piece that Blank Radio did on ex-Mormon mean girl, little old me. But there was someone in the comments that was going through like every just kind of vile comment by a Mormon. And I think they were ex-Mormon, but they were responding to everyone and they would be like, you shouldn't be judgmental. And Elder Uchtdorf is going to save the Mormon church. And they like kept saying that again and again
spin-off.
about like how Elder Uchtdorf is like
I could
was
get
like,
behind
all
that
right.
conspiracy theory because
I
I
would
do
love it,
think he
yeah.
got demoted for being too woke
Yeah.
And too kind,
and
probably.
too handsome.
My grandmother, rest her soul, she would always be like, I have an irreverent crush on Elder Uchtdorf.
The stirrings I feel.
I love the women who will be like, like a little bit of an admitting that Elder Uchtdorf is just hot.
Yeah.
We
Silver
love to see
Fox. Yep.
Good for them.
it. Okay, so back to Elder Bednar, robot.
Every time.
Jarring.
Robot man. Elder Bednar's concept of, quote, having the faith to not be healed. I read it on my mission for the first time and it fucked me up. You have to have the faith to be healed, but you won't be healed unless you accept that sometimes God won't heal you and it's for the best, so don't be mad. But if you expect him not to heal you, you'll definitely not be healed. It made no sense at all. I felt like I didn't know how to pray anymore. How do I ask for and expect blessings while also not expecting them? It just seemed like a cruel concept, and after giving everything to the gospel and still getting hospitalized for my depression and suicidal ideation, I'm so sorry, I figured the Mormon God just wasn't going to help me the way the prophets told me he would.
That is rough
valid.
and so valid.
Whoa.
I feel like that one explained the brain of a mental gymnastics, like trying to make it work Mormon so well.
Yep.
Because you see such clear contradictions, but it's like there has to be a way that this makes sense. Like I'm maybe just missing it. And also just the way, I wonder if I was trying to think if there's like a specific term for this. Either of you might know it, but it's like, I don't know if this is circular thinking necessarily, but just the way that the Mormon church will be like, yeah, pray to God to get what you want. And if you're worthy, you'll be blessed. But if God doesn't want to give you that blessing, then you also won't get blessed with the thing you're praying for. Just like, well, then what's the point of any of it anyway? Like all these ways that they kind of just like cushion themselves from, well, that didn't work though.
Yeah, totally.
And it's like there's a way that there are kind of things in life that are paradoxes that you can hold. There's something to be said for sort of like expecting that something is possible for yourself while also accepting that maybe there's kind of something, maybe that's not going to happen, but something better will happen. I don't know. There's a way to hold that. But I feel like when it's coupled with shame in Mormonism and it's all just in the service of getting you to entrench deeper into like shame and obedience, and then it's just messed up. You can't like hold a paradox stressfully. You kind of like have to be able to relax to be comfortable with paradox. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So much. Yeah.
It's amazing how fast the church went from we're the one true church on the face of the earth because we got revelations and prophets and miracles and angels to you got to have faith not to be healed, not to see angels, to have prophets that don't prophesy, see or revelate anything, as
Yep.
a reveal, whatever the word is.
Yes, totally. And I think that distinction, I'm so glad you made that distinction because I remember a phase of my faith journey when I was super progressive Mormon and just like, I can do it. I'm progressive. And one of my biggest connections to the Mormon theology was being like, it's meant to be nuanced. It's meant to be paradoxical.
Yeah.
And I like, as an English girly, to your point, was
yeah.
kind of like, well, I can live in paradox. Like, isn't that not the nature of life? And like, felt like that was like a something to be proud of and to be like, oh, these people who are leaving the church, they just can't handle nuance and complexity and the paradoxical nature of what is Mormonism. And I'm glad you made that distinction because I agree with you. I think there's a lot of beauty in paradoxes, living in that acceptance you just described, but not coupled with lies and guilt and shame. That's where it gets bad.
And it is set up to make you feel guilty at every point, where your failure to understand something that they have actively tried to hide from you or have actively put forth a more homogenous message, like with the Joseph Smith story thing. It's like, this is the one that they're putting out constantly and we have no reason to know that there's any other. But you didn't know about it, so you obviously didn't have the faith because you didn't go out of your way to to ask if there was stuff that they weren't showing you. And they're never not trying to show you stuff. So if you think they're not trying to show you stuff, that's just because you're trying to get it, you'd be suspicious. And
if you're looking at too much stuff that's not the mainstream stuff, then you're sinful for that.
Yeah.
So you also shouldn't be looking.
Yeah.
Right. It's like you can never win. It's even the whole premise of like Moroni's promise that you can know the church is true. It's like if you ask in faith and you do, and you go and you read it, and then you ask in faith, and then nothing happens. And what do they tell you? Oh, it's because you did something wrong. You didn't have enough faith. You need to go back and do it again. Or even better, you already know it's true. You didn't need the miracles. You didn't need the healing. You didn't need any of the actual things that we say makes us the real thing. You just already knew. Mm-hmm. And then if you question that, it's a moral intellectual failure. Ooh, which is
it's
so
such
insidious.
A mindfuck.
Yeah.
It really is. It really is. And yeah, the depth of it, the layers to it. I just had someone on the podcast last week and I was talking to him about a lot of things, but he was saying in his view, one of the biggest faults of the Mormon church was that as compared to a lot of other religions, they wanted an answer to everything. And so you have kind of this whole track record of prophets like, oh, well, what happens to, like some pretty deep cut doctrines. And then now in the age that we live in, you can go track all of that and be like, oh, but that doesn't add up with this, or that doesn't make sense there. And they now, to your point, are kind of playing the more maybe like, well, we don't know everything type thing and put it on your shelf. But it's like, but kind of the whole point of Mormonism, I feel like as a differentiator was like, no, because God speaks to us now. Mm-hmm. So we actually do have every single answer. And then that didn't age very well.
It didn't.
We actually do have every single answer.
That's the thing is, in all this, I was hoping that I could have enough faith and the wherewithal and the studiousness to find the answers, and that I could offer that to people who were questioning their faith. That's what I hoped I could do in all my years of study and all that. But ultimately what it came to, it was like, there is an answer to all this, and that it's total baloney. Like, that is the answer. Once that crystallizes, you're like, oh, yeah, that's what, it makes way more sense.
Absolutely. Like, as opposed to painstakingly trying to answer all the shelf questions, it's just like, oh, I don't have to.
Yeah, I don't have to buy into racism. I just don't have to do that, actually.
I don't have to justify it.
I don't.
Yep, it is quite a relief. Okay, learning Joseph Smith was essentially a treasure hunter. Something about that just seems so fucking fishy. ... I hate Joseph Smith.
So true.
I included that one.
Fishy as fuck.
So fucking fishy. Joseph Smith, so fucking fishy.
Obsessed.
I think I learned about treasure hunter at BYU, and I just think I was kind of like, all right. Okay. Like it just didn't really bother
Least
me
of my
that much. Honestly, probably
You're like,
true.
who's never hunted for treasure? Come on.
Honestly, I do think a big piece of why the immediate thing I was given was just like a lot of people at the time were like hunting for treasure. And I was just like, I'm not going to go look that up. So I'll take your word for it, Dr. Anthony Sweat, who was my teacher who taught me that thing.
And he was so bad at it that he got repeatedly prosecuted legally for it.
Yes.
That's how bad his gift was.
Yes.
When your hobby spirals out of control.
Your glass-looking
Training
hobby is
pool
tearing this
twice
family
for
apart.
Yeah. Yep. Fucking fishy. The amount of people who wrote in and said that their shelf breaker was the Elder Holland Musket fire talk.
Ooh.
As absolutely atrocious and terrible as that talk is, I'm like, I really think that sent many, many, many people out of the church. As rightly
That is
it should
very
have.
heartening.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's
Really?
great.
Yeah, I know. I was actually, like I said, better that those terrible things were never said in the first place. But I was like, oh, like, I think a lot of people were expecting progress. And that was kind of just like, actually, no. I actually pulled a quote from that talk. So for anyone who doesn't know, this was a BYU devotional. It was maybe given at BYU graduation. I don't know for sure, but
Wasn't there like 2 administrators as well?
Yeah, it was like a faculty thing.
Oh, was it?
Or some kind of, yeah.
Because he was talking to teachers a lot.
Yeah.
he was kind of saying basically like the whole point of his talk was like, we're getting a little too progressive here at BYU.
We're being too nice to the gays.
We're being too nice. Yeah, exactly. We're being too nice to the gay people. He made an extended metaphor about musket fire, which is problematic in and of itself. But I forgot about this quote, which I pulled, that is, pretty shocking. He says, so this is Elder Holland. He says, we have to be careful that love and empathy do not get interpreted as condoning and advocacy, or that orthodoxy and loyalty to principle not be interpreted as unkindness or disloyalty to people. As near as I can tell, Christ never once withheld his love from anyone, but he also never once said to anyone, because I love you, you are exempt from keeping my commandments. We are tasked with trying to strike that same sensitive, demanding balance in our lives.
See, if I would have had that one moment, I would have been like, yeah, absolutely.
I think
I would have been so on board.
I think it buys into kind of what I was saying with like the paradoxical nature of things, of like being almost, I mean, addicted is a really strong word, maybe just like conditioned, used to being like, it's really complicated and that's really hard. But like, aren't things like this that way? Like, aren't things like this complicated? Isn't it indeed a sensitive, demanding balance to strike? When reading it now, I'm like, he's literally saying like, no, we got to get a little more homophobic again, y'all.
And the musket fire metaphor, like he could have not done the musket fire metaphor.
This is just like weeks after the Colorado shooting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, the way the victim silenciness of it all is bad enough on its own. Like, hey, don't confuse our desire to just like have traditional marriage or traditional gender views, traditional as of the last couple hundred years. But then what he's not saying is how the church is actively trying to dissemble the rights of queer people, not just in the United States, but in the world. They have lobbyists in Mexico and in other countries that are trying to like clamp down on gay people. So it's not just like, we have our differences of beliefs, but we all just need to live together in love, even though I don't condone. It's like, they're actually using their money and influence to take away other people's rights who have nothing to do with the church.
Yeah.
And then being like, when they have the audacity to complain about that, we need to pick up our muskets and fire back. It's like, ooh, we find out that the guy that we thought was the bulldog for the Lord was just all rhetoric. Like, he doesn't have like that genuine loving heart. He's a good speaker. And I shouldn't say that. Maybe he does have a good heart for some things, and some of his beliefs prevent him from shining that love to others through these like stupid institutional things.
Yeah, it is. I didn't even think about that level of hypocrisy of just, sure, it's one terrible thing to say here at our institution, we can't condone someone's sexuality, but really actively putting time and money and resources into trying to prevent people from just living freely, from accessing their rights, like going out of our way, their way to do that is such a different thing. And it really does put words like that into a very different perspective.
He's like, we're being too nice. And it's like, you're doing the most to be so shit.
Yeah.
Well, and he literally commandeered a podium to like leverage his authority toward an individual, Maddie Easton, who was the valedictorian who graduated from BYU as a queer person, which insane enough, hard enough as it is, who dared mention it in an approved speech. And he's still like, how dare this student commandeer the podium? And it's like, it was approved. And of course,
it wasn't approved by Elder Holland, and he's
not approved,
higher up
and
on
he's
the rankings,
letting them know.
That was the very
like,
next paragraph after this.
How dare a person share their unique experience? That's what every single other valedictorian does. They just happen to be straight.
Yep.
So like, sorry for existing. He didn't say like, me and my boyfriend are getting married right after this in defiance of all our culture. Like, he was just like, I'm gay and it's been my thing, my struggle, and I love the Lord and we can do great things. And
which you would think would be good PR for the church.
You would
but
think.
It's because Elder Holland, on whatever level, understands that just visibility of gay people is threatening.
Is the problem, because once you know a gay person, it's hard to want to fight against them, because you're like, oh, they're just a normal person.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off.
No, sorry to cut you off.
Another thing I was thinking about along those lines, because so many people's shelf breakers who wrote in was just someone in my life came out as gay. My brother or my friend or this person or that person. And that was a big part of my journey too that I've talked about, is my friend coming out as gay. Part of me was thinking, oh, this is really beautiful. And then another part of me was thinking, how terribly sad that it takes that,
Yeah.
you know? And I was thinking like how sad that it takes seeing that up close to like really understand how just objectively at the surface horrible it is.
Yeah.
And yeah, to your point, for so many people, that's just kind of like where it gets like, that's not going to be justifiable in any way. And that's where the visibility thing itself is just going to be a problem for the church. Yeah, the musket fire talk, one silver lining, I guess, is that
Yeah.
a lot of people left the church.
That's how it always is. It's like every terrible thing the church or its defenders do, and the way, you know, the vitriol with which they approach the conversation just exposes all the types of things that we're saying. Like, hey, this is a toxic culture that produces toxic false attitudes. And you can see it in any of the reactions where people are like, how dare you? You're not allowed to speak about this. You're just, you know, it's like, keep talking.
Yep.
Like, this is it. This is.
Yep, there it is. Full display. Full display. It still amazes me though. Yes and no, because like I get it, but I'm also just surprised by the church continually doing this type of thing. Because I'm like, even if Elder Holland just didn't say the quiet part out loud, kept it quiet, a lot of people would have stayed. You can push people really far and they will still stay. And you are pushing people far enough that they're like, why are you pushing it? Is sometimes how I feel. And like, even still to this day, I think the latest big example was when the current prophet, Russell M. Nelson, said, don't take counsel from unbelievers or whatever. I think there are so many people in the church that are like desperately trying to stay. And they're like, really? What if you just didn't say that? Even though we know that that's implicitly being like served to us. Now that you've said it out loud, you've said it out loud, you know? And I feel like it just feels like this balancing act that they're doing really terribly. But to your point, I'm like, well, at least now we can actually point to like, no, it's written there. Like it was actually said, as opposed to just like, this is like the messaging that feels like is coming across, you know?
And it is amazing how much, and this is true in all religions as far as I can tell, but Mormonism, there's a specific like style and cadence, and it's not hyperactive in the way that some religious experiences are. It's more hypoactive, gets you into that like lulled carnal security kind of mindset. But what was I just gonna say? Sorry, what was the last thing you said? I always start with too many qualifiers.
Yeah, they just need to stop saying the super problematic things. Let them just exist quietly in the background.
Quietly in the background. I lost it.
Maybe it'll come to you.
Take over.
I was excited to hear it. So
Well, hopefully it was a good qualifier.
yeah, the qualifier itself.
Sometimes the qualifier.
It qualifies everything.
Destination.
The real points are the qualifiers we make along the way.
Okay, next one. I am a huge Spider-Man fan. I was intrigued. My curiosity was piqued by how this relates. And watched Andrew Garfield in Spider-Man as a teenager. I saw that he was in a new Hulu series, Under the Banner of Heaven, playing a Mormon detective. I love true crime, and I knew I had to watch this show. Everything on the show was surrounding concepts of Mormonism that were on my shelf, but I never had the desire to look deeply into. But watching the show left me questioning a lot of things. I began to search church history, found podcasts, and so many other validating sources, even from the church itself, that verified all of these things that were hidden from me. My shelf busted and crashed to the ground, and I have been deconstructing ever since. Thank you for being a big part of that faith transition and helping me heal a part of my life I thought I would never fix. Really nice. Under the Banner of Heaven.
Interestingly, that's where my partner and I met, was at the premiere for Under the Banner of Heaven.
Where we were in the same room as Andrew Garfield.
Where was it?
In the Broadway Theater. It's like the historic theater in downtown Salt Lake.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a fun little connection.
Yeah,
there.
totally. We were there.
Sparks flew over the Under the Banner of Heaven.
Yeah, I mean, they actually had snuck into the event just to see Andrew Garfield.
Really?
And I was like, what if instead of Andrew, what if
I'm here.
I love to be a settling soul.
That was the same night I drunkenly approached a Real Housewife at the pre-drinks thing. She was really nice. It was Meredith.
Oh,
and I
yeah.
had
Yeah.
too many wines on an empty stomach, and then
it'll do it to
eventually her like person she was with was like, do you want a photo? Because I just like wouldn't stop talking to her, and I was like, yes.
They're like, let's take the photo, and very nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Move along.
Wait, that's a fun Under the Banner of Heaven connection. Yeah, I was thinking about how this is probably just because I'm so entrenched in this space, but I feel like we're going to see a lot more where that came from.
Oh yeah. Mormon, like we were saying, it's just a treasure trove of interest. Super, I'm obviously biased, but I just think Mormonism is so fascinating. Like Utah, the history of Utah is so fascinating. Like where else do we have like a state that is so still to this day, like practically run by a religion, and the whole like immigration story and colonization story, it's all just fascinating. So like the prototypical American religion, it was like invented to be the American religion. It's just wild.
It's wild.
And so yeah, we're gonna see more and more and more stuff. That one, when we were talking about Joseph Smith getting his like oh no, we're not allowed to spit, the image that I had was the Under the Banner of Heaven one, where Emma's approaching him about polygamy and things, and she's like really upset, and he's just like gets in this like, my daughter, thou wilt be destroyed if thou continues arguing against my servant Joseph. And she's just like fuck you. It's
like,
really like blood curdling to watch.
Yeah, it is. They do a
puts
really
whole
good
new
job of that. Yeah, that show, I think it does such a good job of showing the connections, right? Especially for a lot of people who can be like, well, the past is the past and people were products of their time and back in that time, blah, blah, blah. But when you're seeing it play out in the actual Lafferty case, it's like, oh, it's undeniable how connected all of this is.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it portrays that really, really well. I cannot wait for the day where we have the Joseph Smith story.
Yeah.
Because
made
there's
by
so much there.
A24.
Yes,
Yeah.
honestly.
It should have been Matthew McConaughey in his heyday. That's who it should have been. And be like, all right, brothers and sisters.
Yeah, who would it be now? Ooh,
There's
we
a
should think
few
on that.
actors.
I know we kind of already did the role, but I really think it could be Rob Pattinson.
Yeah, honestly.
Honestly, yeah.
The guy who played the bear.
Oh, Jeremy Renner.
Yeah, he
right?
could do it.
Yeah.
Or not. No, he's
No, not Jeremy
Hawkeye.
Renner. Jared, something with a J. Jeremy White.
Jeremy White. You need someone who's got like a genuine like smarm and a confidence.
Yep.
But
a little bit of like a seediness.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a fun exercise to cast that.
Sound off in the YouTube comments.
But I want
Yeah.
an HBO series so bad.
So bad. I think there will be. I think we were just talking to Bentley, my partner, about his dreams. He wants to do TV shows. And I'm like, if you could be the cinematographer for like that.
Bentley, if you're watching, let's
Bentley,
meet
you
up
can hear us
for
right
a creative meeting. Would love to
You're like,
talk
"Could
scripts
I,
and
have his
cinematography.
Yes, I thought Under the Banner of Heaven was phenomenal, and happy for this person that answered some things for them. Okay, this one is a sad one. Someone says, I have had an eating disorder and body dysmorphia. I was newly postpartum with my baby. I would sit and cry in my closet every morning, not wanting to get dressed in those awful garments that made me feel gross and clung so tight. One morning, I decided I was not going to keep putting my postpartum body and mind through hell all day, and I didn't put on my garments. I expected to be racked with guilt and shame, but instead I felt relief and like I could breathe. I was confused because shouldn't I feel bad? That experience broke my shelf. It all went downhill, or should I say uphill from there.
I love that one.
Yeah.
I love that one too, because I think the clothing thing is such an easy thing to be like, oh yeah, you sold your soul for a spaghetti strap tank top. And I'm like, fuck yes, I did.
First of all,
Yeah.
valid.
And I would do it a million times over. Because it actually, in actuality though, it's a big deal.
It is.
For so many reasons, it's a big deal. Even just on the surface level of like, I enjoy being comfortable in the clothing that I put on my body all day, every day. And then of course you start talking about body dysmorphia and eating disorders and sensory issues and vaginal health. Like, it's a big deal. Like, that is a big deal. And I think that is, whenever I speak about that specifically online, I'm curious if you two have a similar experience. That is the thing that I feel like so many Mormons are just like, oh yeah, like you you know, was it worth it to take off your garments or whatever? But I'm like, that's just such a downplaying of something that's such a significant quality of life thing, like what you wear.
And it's just speaking to the patriarchy and how much women claiming autonomy over the way that they present their bodies is the biggest deal. Like, most people didn't leave the church to wear a spaghetti strap, you know? Even if they did, it's because that like represents something so much deeper.
Yeah.
And especially, I love that story because I love that she just had a moment where she was like, fuck this, I'm gonna like prioritize myself and my well-being and my ability to parent, presumably.
Yeah.
And isn't that so many things in the church where it's just like this boogeyman that you've been conditioned to, like the monsters at the edge of the map that are going to swallow you whole if you dare step outside the prophet's guidance. So, you know, a lot of people with like, there is a lot of guilt around sex and things. And I know people experience both things on that, but like a lot of people like have sex or masturbate and be like, oh, that actually wasn't bad. Or be gay, you know, have a gay experience. Like, oh, I'm not racked with guilt. There's no reason for me to believe or feel that I've done something horrific, because I just simply haven't. And it, like, my body knows that.
Yeah.
Taking off a garment and just feeling free in my organism, like my organism doesn't feel upset about that. My soul doesn't feel upset about that because I'm just existing as me, rather than having like this church own the real estate of my body. And it is always between me and the world. Like,
Absolutely. I was thinking about that with the guilt thing because I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking, I would hope if anyone was listening that's maybe cusp or whatever, maybe you do feel guilty when you take off your garments. It might not be everyone's experience to feel just immediate relief or whatever, but I've been thinking so much about embodiment, the difference, I guess, between like being in your brain versus being in your body, and how for me, even still to this day, my brain will sometimes say to me like, you should feel guilty. And then I have to just take a beat and be like, but do I actually? You know what I mean? Like, it just how deep in our brains that is when it's so counter to what it actually feels like.
yeah. That makes sense, because we're given our cognitive structures, where we inherit those from the church, and they become the foundations of all our growing our garden of thoughts. You know, that's the what's the scaffolding for our ideas, and we can rebuild those with time, with psychedelics, with therapy, with, you know, whatever. But there is still always going to be that Mormonness in our brain, especially for those of us who are like deep in it from childhood. And that's okay. And we do have to like evaluate and not always judge the thoughts that come in. You know, it's like, oh yeah, there's a thought that's telling me I should be ashamed. Do I need to be ashamed? No.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe that changes, maybe it doesn't. But being able to like recognize it and not, I always am. Maybe I shouldn't always say always. Like, never say never. Never say always. Too many caveats, too many qualifiers. Let's move on.
I'm like, okay, next one.
Yep.
Get us there, Haley.
I was actually thinking about absolutes today because I think it was a stake president who said this to Bentley and I when we were doing our like engagement, whatever. But he said, never speak in absolutes. And that was actually a really useful piece of advice.
Honestly, yeah.
Really?
Nonviolent communication.
Yeah,
from
I was
your
like,
stake
okay,
president.
slay.
Is that the
Yeah.
only absolute you're allowed to speak in?
The only one.
Kind of like the only a Sith deals in absolutes. And it's like, only? Well, then, my sir, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Just
Yeah.
continually breaking the layers.
Yeah. Paradox.
Okay. Paradoxical. Okay, someone said, oh, this one's super interesting. The church changed a lot of things in the temple, I think it was around 2019, to make them look slightly less sexist, but also because God commanded it, wink. These specific parts of the ceremony were parts I had struggled with on a fundamental level and was totally dismissed and gaslit by family, leaders, etc. about how those parts of the ceremony were ordained by God. I tried to convince myself for years that it was all normal and I just didn't understand it right. When the church changed it and women were praising this change, the same women who tried to convince me it was all equal and I was completely misinterpreting it before, I was done. The last straw for me. I could see how women have been controlled and manipulated in the name of God since the church began.
Beautiful. Another one that I love.
I was thinking about how sometimes when the church does make its baby steps of progress, it actually backfires in that way.
Because people had to believe that their suffering had meaning. And so they built up all of this stuff to help them have that. And then they're like, wait, so that was all for nothing. And I was shamed the entire time.
Yep.
And not supported.
Yep.
Yeah.
But as long as you don't keep connecting the dots, you can just just absorb the shame and the guilt of it like you do with everything else in the church.
Totally.
Because it's just that constantly, right? For every subject in Mormonism, there's an aspect of that.
And I think that temple one, there's that temple one. I've experienced this personally with like mission changes of, well, missions are so different now. And I'm glad, obviously. I'm like, thank God kids these days aren't doing what we had to do on missions. But it's also, doesn't decrease the negative impact of what the people went through before. And then also begs the question of like, well, was it right then? Or was it not right then? And now this is right. It just doesn't add up. And when we're trying to convince ourselves that these things are okay, that don't feel okay, we say, well, this is just how God wants it. And then when it changes, it's like, wait, which was it then? Yeah. So I thought that was a really interesting one. And I'm proud. Reading these, I seriously was just like, how cool. Like these moments where people just like free themselves. I was like, ooh, it's just like so powerful to think about. Because it's hard. It's really hard.
How many Mormons does it take to change in a light bulb? Did I say that right? Change a light bulb?
It's like 1 and like 10 to say that it was never changed or that.
Yeah. 12 million or whatever.
12, yeah.
Okay. The idea of being a woman in the Mormon eternity was my shelf breaker. My husband can read about worship and generally know the God he will supposedly become like. On the other hand, I am left to guess and hope I am more than an invisible silent spirit baby maker. Also, if gender is so essential and important and existed before this life, etc., why was subjugating women okay for all of human history? Like, were gender equality and the importance of female voices not important or eternally relevant enough to be revealed to a prophet? This was the black hole that consumed my shelf.
Oh, yeah.
That was kind of, I think, a little bit the point I was trying to make just barely of, okay, great that changes are made, but would not the truth just be revealed in all its truth if God had the capacity to do so? I'm curious if you two ever experienced this, because I was thinking about another justification that I made for a long time around Brigham Young, more specifically, because like, how do you justify Brigham Young? But I did try. And the justification I made was, I was like, I think God had to use someone who was like
tough.
Yeah. And like enough of kind of like an eccentric enough person that would be like willing to do what needed to be done for the kingdom of God. But unfortunately, that came with like a lot of racism and, and I really thought that. It's basically at its root, like perfect God, imperfect people. But I was kind of like, no, he chose Brigham Young specifically for his wildness, essentially, because that he needed a personality like that to do what needed to be done. What an inefficient system, were that actually how God like wanted to reveal like the full truth,
God needed a sociopath. That was the only way he could get it done.
Yep.
Something that always got me, like, I heard Gordon B. Hinckley say, anyone who makes disparaging marks about people of another race are not worthy of the priesthood. So then I go and I read Brigham Young and I read a bunch of disparaging remarks, and not just Brigham Young, a bunch of prophets who are saying disparaging and just falsely, like absolutely false ideas about racial origins, genetics, all kinds of things. And being like, well, if this prophet, if what he said is true, my prophet in my time says is true, that people who make disparaging remarks, like racist remarks, aren't worthy of the priesthood, well, then Brigham Young wasn't worthy of his priesthood. Why would I believe that someone who is capable of hating a person of another race has any proximity to Jesus and the God of love? It doesn't make any sense. A person who was close to Jesus would have so much love. Like, that would be the first thing on the list. Is like, oh, people are equal. Men and women need to be treated equal. Like, obviously, right? Like, but that's not the case. And that's never the case in the church, in Christianity generally. It's always these like brute men who don't show any of that like genuine love of Christ. I shouldn't, there's been a lot of people in the history of Christianity, but
Yes.
but in like the church and like Brigham Young's, you don't get the sense of like, oh, this is a man changed by the love of Jesus Christ.
Yep.
It's not the one, and
Women
it's not
stop
the.
whining.
Yeah. Yes.
His whole thing was like, if you truly love your brother, you will kill him with
will
a javelin
stone him.
if you catch him breaking the rules.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, yep, this guy is
off.
communing with God. Communing with God. No, and I mean, it's sad too, because it's like those are the things then you start justifying it in your God you believe in, because these men are supposed to be like your closest proximity to God.
So then your highest idea of love is just fundamentally fucked up.
Yeah.
Or like you just don't even have access to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
I was just thinking
No,
about the Heavenly
please.
Mother thing again, and how,
Yeah, please.
Mormons are always like, we're the only religion that has a feminine deity. And it's like, first of all, you're not. Secondly, they only like, obviously this like, enshrouded thing. You're not allowed to even talk about it. You're not allowed to discuss. You're not allowed, certainly not allowed to talk to your mom. And someone was just commenting that on Mother's Day, they had to sing, "Oh My Father," because it's the one song that
only
happens to
song that
mention a woman. And it's like,
And they're like, we were so progressive for that, actually. The fact that we have that song says a lot
Because
about us.
it mentions Heavenly Mother and Oh My Father.
in a song called "Oh My Father."
And it doesn't even call her a whore when it mentions her.
whoa, that's progress, scripturally speaking.
Yeah.
All the mothers weeping with joy at the mention.
So good to be seen.
They sang "Oh My Father" at like a sacrament meeting on Mother's Day.
Yeah, that's pretty typical. That's definitely happened to me.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And then the candy bar,
Yeah.
like as the women are leaving, to all the women,
Which
of
is,
course,
yeah, you do get the candy bar.
to mothers
is
and
that?
future mothers, which
Yeah.
is all that a woman can be, a mom or a future mom. So.
That's it.
This one is along those lines, but I thought this was a very impactful way of saying this thing. When I realized that the line separating the imperfect men leading the church and the perfect gospel was blurry on purpose.
Yeah.
That was kind of like a whoa thing, because I was like, yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those things you kind of come to realize, but it's purposeful because then you can kind of do whatever the fuck you want.
And if they drew any kind of clear distinction, game over.
Yeah.
The minute it's clearly defined.
Yeah, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't.
Because at every level, there's just been lies and corruption.
I know. I was like, oh yeah, that really, there's a difference between being like, this feels too blurry, I don't get it, versus like, no, it's intentionally blurry so that I don't get it, so that I continue to basically gaslight myself and keep doing the thing.
I guess it didn't used to be that blurry. They used to be pretty much like, if a prophet said it, then... I mean, I guess they still kind of are like that in spirit. But like Brigham Young and
And
stuff was
often
like, anything I say, you should count it as scripture.
Yeah, like what I say goes
Yeah.
pretty much no matter what.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so I
But
guess it
also
hasn't
was
always
like,
been
I'm a
blurry.
Yankee guesser and not a real prophet like Joseph.
Honestly, Brigham Young might be the film that we need by A24.
Chilling.
Oh, that would
one's
be
almost,
chilling.
Yeah, too scary.
That's a
I
horror.
mean, I can't compare the horror of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, but that one would
Two
be,
interesting episodes for sure.
Yeah,
Interesting
honestly,
characters.
Honestly. Okay, this is the last one I'm going to read, and this is some tea, might I say. My husband is a cop, and he booked a few bishops and stake presidents into jail. The city, majority Mormon, and the church kept it under wraps. They let the bishops and stake presidents continue to be leaders in the church as if nothing happened. They only had to serve time in jail on Saturdays. That was a major
Wait,
shelf.
Wait, what did they do? But what did they do?
I don't know. They didn't say. So if this is you, DM me. Tell me.
I would love to know what they were convicted for, and what do you mean they only had to go to jail on Saturday?
How
It's
do you
like
pull
summer
that
camp.
off?
Like,
This is like
is
maybe
this?
like a
Class?
full blown conspiracy against like the cities in which we live. But I was like, just even the fact that you could keep being bishop and stake president. This is all alleged.
Wait, like
all
while because
alleged.
they were going to jail on the Saturday and like leading a congregation on the Sunday.
Yeah.
Oh, during that period of time.
Yeah,
Not
according to
just
this-
while
according
the
to
crimes
this
were being
person.
committed.
oh,
Yeah.
that's not surprising. I feel like that very much aligns with Mormon.
What they do.
I've never heard of someone only going to jail on Saturdays.
I'm
What,
also
is that
wondering
just like a
what-
reform program.
I have
know.
I have a friend from
don't
high
do
school who's
fraud anymore.
is a cop in a predominantly Mormon area, and he says the corruption there is just like insane. They're the ones who are pushing all these like heinous bills, giving church giving the church the right to they don't have to turn in sexual predators. And it's like, oh, if you're Mormon, then sexual predation isn't a crime. Great. And he's like, it's just horrible out there. Anyway, so that it's not surprising to me.
This is the thing. I'm more scared of this than Scientology. I'm like,
Yeah, that's valid.
I'm like, who's listening right now that we're onto something? No, yeah. I mean, I was actually thinking, you know, the whole, would you rather be on a deserted island or in the woods with a bear or a man? Have you seen that discourse happening?
Ooh.
Thing going on. And every woman is like, a bear for sure, a bear.
Bear. I was thinking that thought just about how I used to, growing up, just like see so much safety in Mormonism. Like, oh, if my babysitter was Mormon, or like just how Mormons use that in such haphazard ways of just like, well, they're Mormon, so like they can babysit my kids. And thinking about how there used to be such a safety for me, and like, oh, this man is Mormon, so like if my boss is Mormon and I like need to talk to him privately, like at least he's Mormon. And I was just thinking about how completely reversed that is now. And like how, I mean, unsafe might be a strong word, but how like unsafe I think I feel now around Mormon men, like scared of them.
Yes.
And not in like a danger, like physical danger way, but just like, I don't want to be like talking to Mormon men.
Like, I totally get that. Like repressed men
yes,
under the patriarchy, they're scary.
They're really scary.
The things that they're repressing are going to come out in dysfunctional ways, and you just, as a woman, you know too much about how easily you could become like the object of that.
Yes. And even like, I was talking about this last week too, because I interviewed this man, his name's Andrew, and he's like 54. And I was so weirdly nervous to interview an older man. It showed to me how much I still have of like this authority, intimidation, just this feeling that I felt all growing up as a woman in the church, which is like, I just felt like men around me in authority like thought I was dumb and like didn't value what I had to say and didn't value me as a person beyond like this very limited view of like what a woman can do. And just realizing like how deeply embedded that still is in a lot of ways. I think that's the biggest thing it triggers for me, is like being around men like that just makes me feel small, because I feel like I was made to feel small by men like that my entire life.
Even though you're the one with the successful podcast, having him on, and a man in this position would never think to like be concerned. Men just so naturally like take on excess confidence. But you can't even have like the amount that you've like clearly earned.
Yeah, that's nice of you to say, thanks. But yeah, it is an interesting thing, just like how deep all those things can go.
Oh yeah.
And just feeling like, anyway, all of that to say, quite frightening about the cops like secretly booking people.
Yeah, that is.
But heartening to know about Saturday jail.
Could I just do the Saturday version?
I've heard
I'm
about.
actually gonna do the Saturday
I'll
jail.
get baptized if that's what it takes.
Society presidency. I'm sorry, I gotta be at church on Sunday. Yeah, there's a life hack, I guess, if anyone's committing petty crimes around
The power of
Utah.
the ask.
Yeah, honestly.
I was gonna. Oh, sorry.
No, please go
I
ahead.
was going to say, on the subject of implicit trust among Mormon men, it's not a coincidence that Utah is the fraud capital of the United States. The second state is Florida, but not by a long shot like Utah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, affinity fraud, where you just assume, oh, these people around me who share the same beliefs are good people, but they're not. They're actually taking you for all your money. At least in the state of Utah, it loses like $1 gajillion.
I'm thinking of MLMs too.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like deeply embedded in the culture of like, oh, this person wants what's best for me and they're going to take my money and do great things with it. Like, because they're Mormon people and I want to do an MLM deep dive.
You should. I had 2 close calls with MLMs while Mormon as like a college and like post-college intern.
Really?
Like with these older women trying to like take advantage of me by pulling me into this MLM, and I like didn't quite know what was happening, and I kind of like got sucked in.
It's really
2 close calls.
It's really scary. Like there was this couple in our ward way back in Bentley, and I were married, still at BYU, but they were doing like have you ever heard of, I still don't fully know what it is, but like the coaching thing where they were like, we are coaches, but you have to like come and like meet our coach. Or maybe they didn't even call it coaches, but it was some like mentorship, but like
Coaches,
Ponzi
coaches,
scheme?
coaching.
Yes.
That's
Yep.
coaching.
Coachella.
That's what it was
I
called.
wish we knew the name because I feel like there's a few like coaching based
Yes.
MLMs.
And then my sister, who lives in Orem, she got approached by 2 separate people in her ward about the same thing. And then later, when living here, we got approached by a guy at the park that was being like unusually kind. That's one thing about ex-Mormonism. I'm always kind of cynical because I'm like, I know what I was doing when like I had a message to share.
Oh, yeah.
So when someone's like keeps being nice, you're like, okay, like what anyway.
And then it always drops and you're like, there it is.
I know. It's so sad.
Yeah.
You're like, damn, I wish we could just be nice and not be recruiting each other for our coaches. Anyway, thank you both so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you
So much
much.
fun to
Yes.
chat. I feel like it's so nice to have, because I'm always jealous of people with co-hosts because I'm like, it's usually just, it's like nice to have people to talk to.
It
So
really is.
thank you so much for coming and talking about shelf breakers. I'm sure we will collaborate again soon, hopefully. Thank you. And if anyone is looking for the both of you, Zelph on the Shelf on Instagram, YouTube. I remember you have it across all platforms. TikTok.
Yes.
Find us in any Trader Joe's,
We're always there.
in the Mormon corridor.
Largely YouTube though. That's where our best stuff is.
Yeah,
Best stuff on
definitely.
YouTube, Zelph on the Shelf. I did do some Brad Wilcox research and was laughing my ass off at
Zelph enemy number 1, Brad
the girls,
Wilcox.
the girls come rap.
The girls come.
So go check. That's a good place to start.
Yeah,
We
if
love
they're
Brad's
not familiar
music.
with
We
you.
Yeah,
really
big
support his
fan.
art.
Yeah.
We don't support him as a coach, but we do support him
As a
an
rapper.
artist.
Yes,
As a hip-hop
I
artist.
can absolutely get on board with that. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to everybody for listening. Bye.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
This has been a 58 Ember production. For more shows, please visit the 58 Ember channel, 58ember.com, or find us at 58 Ember Media on socials.